Hello everyone, Professor Kurzluck here. So in our previous lecture, we talked about authoritarianism in general. Concentrated power, weak accountability, restricted freedoms, and limited political competition. In this video, I wanted to make those ideas more concrete by examining 4 real-world studies. So as you see, this is how comparative politics textbooks are set up. They talk about a theme, an idea, and then give case studies. This brings these ideas to life. These ideas that we learn about seemingly as concepts, as remote ideas into practice. So the purpose here is not simply to memorize country facts. Instead, it is to understand how authoritarian systems operate in practice, how leaders consolidate power, how institutions are reshaped, and how ordinary people experience political life. So these cases also illustrate something essential, that authoritarianism does not look the same everywhere. We've said this a lot in class, we've said this in our videos. It is on a spectrum. Authoritarianism, just like democracy, looks different in different places. So different regimes rely on different combinations of repression, of legitimacy building, of ideology, and institutional control. So we'll look at 4 case studies: Russia, China, Eritrea, and North Korea. 4 regimes that sit at different points along the authoritarian spectrum. Okay, let's start with Russia. So modern Russia under Vladimir Putin is best understood as an example of electoral authoritarianism. So at the outset, we should say, different scholars categorize these states in different ways. Some scholars would say Russia is an electoral authoritarian state, others a personalistic regime, other a competitive authoritarian state. So just at the outset, we should say that different scholars do categorize authoritarian states differently, depending on what they are looking at. But for the most part, if you pick up a book on Russia, you will encounter this idea of electoral authoritarianism. And this is because Russia holds elections. Political parties exist. Courts operate. Media outlets do indeed broadcast daily news. On paper, these are many democratic institutions. When we just look, Russia has these things. They hold elections. But the real political power is highly centralized in the executive branch. Putin has ruled Russia either as president or as prime minister since 2000. He took a slight hiatus, served as prime minister, but really many political scientists and analysts said he was still in charge. He was still telling Dmitry Medvedev what was going on and how to govern. So since 2000, has ruled as president or prime minister. Over this time, constitutional amendments reset presidential term limits, allowing him to remain in power indefinitely. These changes were approved through formal legal procedures, illustrating how authoritarianism often advances through law rather than lawlessness. The legislature passed laws saying he can remain in power as president. Russia has opposition candidates. Opposition candidates, though, face systemic barriers. Some are disqualified on technical grounds, others are arrested, harassed, or forced into exile to move abroad. Independent media has been dismantled through regulatory pressure ownership consolidation. People buy up or consolidate media outlets that are friendly towards the Kremlin. Um, Journalists who investigate corruption or criticize the government risk intimidation, they risk imprisonment. So in Russia, elections still do occur, but they are deeply unequal. The state dominates television coverage, controls campaign resources, and restricts opposition organizing. Voting becomes less about choosing leaders and more about ratifying existing power. So, what makes Russia interesting to think about is that repression is selective rather than total. Most citizens can live ordinary lives, working, studying. Traveling is a bit harder since the full scale invasion of Ukraine, where um, it's harder to travel now, but for the most part, over the past 20 years of Vladimir Putin's rule, as he was consolidating authoritarianship, citizens could still go abroad. They can do these things as long as they avoid political activity, avoid political activism. This creates widespread self censorship. People learn where the boundaries are and adjust accordingly. Protest is technically legal, but depending on what people are protesting over, it can be heavily, heavily policed. Demonstrations, if they are anti Putin or anti war, anti full scale invasion, are quickly dispersed. Organizers may face legal consequences. Over time, political participation then shifts from active engagement to passive observation. Russia shows how authoritarianism can coexist with the outward forms of democracy. Institutions remain, but their independence is hollowed out. Accountability disappears, even though elections continue to take place. So, when we think of one party rule, we think of China. It is the textbook example of a one party rule. China represents a different authoritarian model because it's a single party rule under the Chinese Communist Party. Unlike Russia, China does not attempt to present itself as an electoral democracy. Power is monopolized by the party, and leadership transitions occur internally to the party rather than through public competition. Under the current leadership of Xi Jinping, authority has become increasingly centralized. Presidential term limits have been removed. Ideological loyalty to Xi is emphasized across institutions. Party control has expanded into universities, corporations, and even local governments. China's authoritarianism relies heavily on bureaucratic discipline combined with technological surveillance. The state operates one of the most sophisticated monitoring systems in the world. Facial recognition, cameras track movement, online speech is filtered through censorship algorithms. Social media platforms are extremely tightly regulated. Activists, lawyers, and journalists are placed under constant supervision, or I guess at least observation. Um, Rather than relying primarily on mass terror, though, China emphasizes preventive control. Potential dissent is identified early and neutralized quietly. At the same time, the regime maintains legitimacy through sustained economic performance and nationalism. For decades, rapid economic growth improved living standards across the country, helping justify this one party role. The government presents itself as efficient, competent, and uniquely capable of managing China's development. Daily life varies dramatically by region and by class. Many citizens experience stability and opportunity. If we look at the chart of living standards in China, they have skyrocketed over the past several decades. But political expression is tightly constrained. Organized dissent is quickly suppressed. Ethnic minorities, particularly in regions like Xinjiang, face extreme surveillance and coercive social engineering. China illustrates how authoritarianism can be deeply institutionalized, embedded not only in politics, but in technology, bureaucracy, and every, everyday governance. Sorry, my dog Mia and Mazakine are in here, and they're noisy girls. Okay, so let's look at Eritrea. So we have Russia, China, Eritrea, a militarized authoritarianism. So Eritrea represents a far more repressive model of authoritarianism. If you just go to Google and type in Eritrea government type, the first AI result is repressive regime, one of the most autocratic in the world. So Eritrea represents a far more repressive model of authoritarianism and offers an important African case study. The Eritrea has been led by the leader since 1993, operates as a highly centralized, personalistic regime. Although Eritrea formally adopted a constitution, we'll see again, as we've said in the past, autocracies oftentimes have these constitutions. The constitution, although adopted, it has really never been implemented. National elections have never been held. Political parties are banned. Independent media has been shut down in the early 2000s. And journalists have been imprisoned without trial. So one of the defining features of Eritrean authoritarianism is indefinite national service. Originally introduced as a temporary program, military conscription became open-ended. Young Eritreans are often forced into years, sometimes even decades, of compulsory service, working on military units, working on state farms, or government projects for really minimal pay. This system functions as both labor extraction and social control. By keeping much of the population mobilized, monitored, and importantly, economically dependent on the state, the regime prevents independent civil society from forming. Families are separated, education is disrupted, immigration becomes one of the few ways to escape. So Eritrea also operates an extensive network of prisons and detention centers. Political prisoners are held without trial, religious minorities face persecution, torture, forced disappearance are widely reported. So unlike Russia or China, Eritrea does not rely on economic performance or sophisticated propaganda. Instead, it governs through isolation, militarization, and fear. Daily life is shaped by scarcity and uncertainty. Citizens avoid political discussions entirely. The state dominates employment, the state dominates movement. Hundreds of thousands have fled the country, creating one of the world's largest refugee populations relative to its size. So Eritrea shows shows the hard end of authoritarian spectrum, where repression is overt, institutions are minimal, and survival depends on being passive. Okay, so Eritrea might be more of a niche case study. That if you don't read the news daily or you don't listen to the news daily, maybe you haven't really encountered Eritrea much. Whereas China, Russia, and our fourth case study, North Korea, maybe you've heard more about. It's certainly in the news more often. North Korea represents one of the most extreme authoritarian systems in existence. Under Kim Jong-un, North Korea North Korea operates as a personalistic dictatorship centered on a ruling family and a persuasive security apparatus. The state controls virtually all media, all employment, housing, and movement of people. Citizens are assigned jobs. Foreign information is barred, is controlled. Radios, televisions are fixed to government channels. Surveillance is constant. Neighborhood committees monitor residents. Political prisons hold tens of thousands of people, often with punishment extending to entire families. The most authoritarian regime on our spectrum today. So unlike China, unlike Russia, North Korea relies heavily on ideological indoctrination and isolation. The regime portrays its leaders as heroic and near divine, while depicting foreign powers as existential threats. We've all encountered, if we just follow the news, how North Korea portrays the US, how North Korea portrays Europe as being a threat to its well-being. In North Korea, economic scarcity is widespread. The state uses food distribution and access to resources as tools of political loyalty. Daily life is tightly regulated. Independent organization is impossible. Even casual remarks carry pretty severe consequences. So North Korea illustrates the far extreme of authoritarianism, where repression is comprehensive and individual autonomy is minimal. So, what can these cases teach us? These cases highlight several important lessons. First, authoritarianism is flexible. It can operate through elections, it can operate through parties, it can operate through militaries, or personalistic rule. Second, authoritarian regimes rarely depend on repression alone. For one, repression is extremely expensive. Two, if you want international legitimacy, repression can be dangerous to overly utilize. Instead, authoritarians shape beliefs, reward loyalty, and manage expectations. Third, everyday life under authoritarianism is often quietly constrained rather than openly violent. People adapt to their surroundings and their situation. They might self-censor. They know what to say and what not to say. They disengage from politics. Finally, authoritarianism persists not because citizens universally support it, but because organizing opposition is risky, it's fragmented, this idea of a collective action problem, and it is, of course, uncertain. So, when we think about authoritarianism, it doesn't look the same from one country to the next. Some states rely more on repression, others on co-optation, others on information propaganda. But authoritarianism is on this spectrum. Okay, thank you.